Where did you get the confidence from to make a film with such...
Ignorance. Sheer ignorance, you know. There's no confidence to equal it.
He's original. He's one of the most creative people in the entertainment business.
Invasions by mythical monsters from the planet Mars.
Functions as an actor, a writer, author, director. He's a magician. Would you welcome, please, Mr. Orson Welles.
Oh, good day to you all. I am Orson Welles. Now, you're obviously wondering, Orson, you've been dead for 36 years. How do you look as good as you do? Well, I am Orson Welles. And who else would be beneficial for this, including thespians everywhere, to tell the story of my professional career? Now, not only that, but we also have some up-and-coming actors that have researched this background of mine. And now we shall give them the chance to explore on how I became the authority in entertainment.
Orson Welles was born to Beatrice Ives Wells, a pianist, and Richard Wells, an inventor, in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Wells was known as a prodigy, like even from when he was small. He was a whiz with the piano. Unfortunately, Wells' parents died by the time he was 16. He was warded to Dr. Maurice Bernstein. Even though Wells got a scholarship to Harvard, he decided to go to the Chicago Institute of Art, but that was only to be for a short few weeks. With his newfound short-learned skills in art, he decided he was going to take a tour of the west coast of Ireland. He was undertaking sketching and painting. It was this that led Orson Welles to the gate. Now, the gate was phenomenal for its time because it focused on not only Irish culture, but wider Europe and American art. At the time, Orson was only 16 and was too young to be cast in the plays. So he concocted a story. The story he concocted was, he was an 18-year-old from the New York theater scene. Well, Orson obviously did a good job because the directors there bought it. And he was cast in their play as a lead. He was cast as a lead in Jude Sis. And this is where Orson began in the world of theater.
So awful. The eyes are black and they gleam like a serpent. The mouth is that's kind of V-shaped with saliva dripping from its rimless lips that seem to quiver and pulsate. And the monster or whatever it is can hardly move. It seems weighed down by possibly gravity or something. The thing's rising up now and the crowd falls back. They've seen plenty. The most extraordinary experience, ladies and gentlemen. I can't find words.
Orson Welles was fortunate enough to continue his career into radio from 1934 to 1940. However, the beginning of this transition was very challenging for Welles. He was often uncredited for his work, particularly from the years from 1934 to 1937. In fact, very few records of his broadcasts were kept during this time, and Welles found himself shuffling between studios at such an intense pace that when he arrived at the studio, he found himself with minutes to spare to read his script before he was on the air.
From my days in radio, I didn't rehearse then either. But it was for a different reason. We were doing so many shows in those days, there wasn't time to rehearse. I can remember NBC in New York. I was acting in 30 different radio shows a week, and they had an elevator set aside just to get me from studio to studio on time. That's really true.
Eventually, Welles was earning as much as $2,000 a week in the later parts of 1937. His performance as the announcer in the drama The Fall of the City was an important development in Welles's radio career, and this made Welles, who was 21 at the time, an overnight star. A year later, in 1938, Welles came across H.G. Wells's novel's version of The War of the Worlds. H.G. Wells and Orson Welles were not related. However, they were fortunate enough to meet each other in October of 1940 in Texas. Ironically, some listeners of the broadcast, while listening live, were fortunate enough to believe that this drama was actually taking place in parts of the world.
Humped shape is rising out of the pit. I can make out a small beam of light against a mirror. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror, and it leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Lord, they're turning into flames. Now the whole field's caught up by the woods, the barns, the gas tanks, and the automobiles spreading everywhere. Coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill. Evidently, there's some difficulty with our field transmission. However, we will return to that point at the earliest opportunity.
Aliens, we will say, were taking over, and although reports of panic were mostly false and never credited, this rocketed 21-year-old Welles into international fame.
The H.G. Wells classic, which is the original for many fantasies about invasions by mythical monsters from the planet Mars. I'm extremely surprised to learn that a story which has become familiar to children through the medium of comic strips and many succeeding novels and adventure stories should have had such an immediate and profound effect upon radio listeners.
The myth of the result that was created on the report was actually mentioned in a public speech by Adolf Hitler. Suicide reports came up, but none were proven. I guess it was the dirty 30s at the time, and maybe aliens taking over wouldn't be a bad thing.
Mr. Orson Welles had an extreme work ethic. He was considered one of the best because of his strong and determined mind. He worked very, very hard in everything he did. This was evident when he transitioned to film on the silver screen, bringing Shakespearean works such as Othello and Macbeth. Then he wrote, produced, directed, and starred in what is considered the GOAT of movies, Citizen Kane.
Greatest American film as far as I'm concerned.
This is the gold standard here.
It's pretty hard to top Citizen Kane.
Citizen Kane is the greatest movie ever made.
And that was like his first film, and he was 26 years old.
The decent, ordinary citizens know that I'll do everything in my power to protect the underprivileged, the underpaid, and the underfed.
He was definitely a risk taker. He constantly pushed the limits of whatever he was working on. His hard-headedness allowed him to get his projects done the way he had envisioned. He never gave up and kept pushing his projects, even as he got older.
Orson Welles was very fond of magic at a very young age, getting his first magic set at age 3. Orson never stopped doing magic throughout the years, and also illustrated it in some of his projects. Magician is a fitting moniker for Welles, as he was so concerned throughout his career with honesty and trickery. His famous deadly production, War of the Worlds, was in a sense a magic trick using the medium of a radio to make the audience believe something extraordinary.
You know, some of the best fun I've ever had was one time when Orson Welles did a big magic show in Las Vegas. And so I've asked Orson to do some of his magic tricks for us tonight, huh? Once again, my wonderful guest, Mr. Orson Welles. Orson, I always wanted to learn a few magic tricks that I could entertain my genie with, you know?
Oh, it's easy. I'm happy to oblige. Any particular trick you'd like to learn?
Yeah, how can I make her disappear? Hey, you know a trick that always amazed me? How they saw a woman in half.
Oh, that old chestnut. We don't do that anymore. Sawing takes too much time. Now we chop off their heads. Bring on the guillotine. Tempered steel from the finest sword maker in Spain. That thing isn't dangerous, it's fatal. Just get up on the platform, I'll show you what I mean. Put your head in that hole.
What are you doing with that knife, pal?
Before we attempt this experiment, have you any last message for our viewers?
Who gave you this trick, Jeannie?
Now then, after the death blade has passed through Mr. Martin's neck, severing the spinal column, the esophagus, and the medulla oblongata, we'll snip off the celery there and place just under where Mr. Martin's nose will have been. 3!
So by the time 1985 came around, Orson Welles, his health started to fail him. He was actually really sick. So for his recording for the Transformers movie, he was wheelchair bound. And that was evident in the sound of his voice, which was the iconic Unicron.
Welcome, Megatron. I am Unicron.
Two things ironic about this is that Orson Welles has even been quoted saying, "You know what I did this morning? I played the voice of a toy. Some terrible robot toys from Japan that changed from one thing to another." He did not like this movie, yet he still gave a performance of a lifetime through his voice, and the iconic resonance that it gave brought a new generation a believable and terrifying villain that has been referenced in pop culture ever since for almost 40 years.
It is the one thing, the only thing that can stand in my way.
32 years after his death, Orson Welles had a movie released. It was one for 40 years in development and it was called The Other Side of the Wind. For 40 years it was in development, and in 2018, Orson Welles once again took to the screen. Seeing this film released starring John Huston and Oja Kadar was an unbelievably unprecedented move. It was a movie created over 40 years, 30 years after Orson Welles' death, and was supposed to be his major comeback. But the fact that this movie came out and the accolades it's received, the absolute genius behind it, has been incomprehensible and incomparable to anything else in the film industry history, and shows the genius that was of Orson Welles.
It's only when you know something about a profession, I think, that you're timid or careful.
How does this ignorance show itself?
I thought you could do anything with a camera that the eye could do or the imagination could do. And if you come up from the bottom in the film business, you're taught all the things that the cameraman doesn't want to attempt for fear he will be criticized for having failed.
Yes.
And in this case, I had a cameraman who didn't care if he was criticized if he failed, and I didn't know that there were things you couldn't do. So anything I could think up in my dreams, I attempted to photograph.
Friday's day off.
So, I'm Orson Welles' grandson.
You're so ugly.
This was evident when he... Fuck.
Time, an overnight star.
Rolling. Action.
Oh, fuck.
But that's not just the only most impressive part. I'm gonna edit that part out there because this came up.
In the world of theater.
Sit check.
Wait. I may need your emotional support for what I just saw.
You can see anything, alright?
Did you do?